I never wanted to be that guy, the desperately paranoid husband tracking his wife's real-time location on a rainy Friday night. But when your gut screams at you for 3 straight months, you finally stop ignoring the dark noise and face the terrifying reality of a dying relationship. It all started when Jessica landed the prestigious executive assistant role at Vance Capital, working directly under Julian Vance, a billionaire tech investor whose name is proudly plastered across the most expensive modern high-rises in downtown Chicago. At first, I was absolutely thrilled for her, genuinely thinking this was the big break she had worked so hard for ever since college. But the subtle, toxic changes began almost immediately within our household. Within weeks, her modest corporate wardrobe shifted dramatically to high-end designer labels like Chanel, Prada, and Gucci, all paid for by what she confidently claimed were generous corporate stipends and elite clothing allowances that Julian handed out to all his top-tier staff to maintain the firm's luxurious public image. Then came the endless late-night strategy meetings, the sudden weekend business trips to 5-star luxury resorts in Aspen and Miami, and the sudden freezing distance that grew between us in our own bed, turning our 5-year marriage into a cold, quiet room of agonizing, emotional silence. Every single time I dared to question the sudden change or asked why her phone was constantly locked with a brand new passcode, she would laugh it off with a cruel, mocking edge, calling me wildly insecure, telling me I totally lacked ambition, and subtly reminding me that my high school history teacher's salary could never dream of affording the luxurious lifestyle she truly deserved. She started looking at our cozy suburban home not as our beautiful sanctuary but as a miserable prison, holding her back from global greatness. The absolute breaking point came tonight on our 5th wedding anniversary, a date we had planned to celebrate months in advance at the small Italian bistro where we had our very first romantic date. Instead of getting ready together, I received a cold, detached text message from her at 4 in the afternoon, saying an urgent international merger had just broken out and required her to stay late at the penthouse headquarters on Wacker Drive. I sat in our empty living room for hours staring at the beautiful anniversary gift I bought her, feeling a dark mixture of despair and anger bubbling up inside my chest until I couldn't take the disrespect anymore. Instead of sitting alone at home eating cold takeout, I grabbed my car keys, got into my old rusted Chevy, and drove downtown through the blinding, pouring rain, my mind racing with every terrible infidelity scenario imaginable. I bypassed the main lobby security after hours by using the spare key card she accidentally forgot on the kitchen counter last week, slipping past the night guard who was completely distracted by his phone monitor. I stepped into the mirrored elevator and pressed the button for the 42nd floor, my heart pounding like a frantic bass drum against my ribs, each passing floor number making it harder and harder to take a deep breath. When the elevator doors slid open, the entire office floor was completely dark, silent, and empty, except for the warm, golden light spilling from Julian's massive corner office at the end of the long glass hallway. Every protective instinct told me to turn around and preserve my sanity, but I forced my feet forward, stepping softly across the plush carpet, my hands trembling violently as I drew closer to the truth. I could hear low whispers, muffled jazz music, and that familiar melodic laughter that used to belong entirely to me, but was now being gifted to another wealthy man behind that heavy mahogany door. I didn't knock I didn't yell. I just slowly pushed the heavy door open, and the entire universe completely stopped when I saw my wife wrapped tightly in Julian's arms on the black leather sofa, surrounded by empty, expensive champagne flutes and beautiful city views. Her face flushed when she looked up and saw me standing there, but it wasn't a look of shame, guilt, or embarrassment. It was a look of absolute annoyance and disgust that I had dared to interrupt her perfect evening. Julian didn't even bother to fix his silk tie or stand up, casually leaning back against the cushions and looking at me like I was a minor inconvenience, a pathetic, uninvited pest who had wandered into his royal kingdom. I stood there frozen, tears streaming down my face as I screamed at her, asking how she could throw away our sacred vows, our history, and everything we had sacrificed to build a life together from nothing. Jessica didn't cry, she didn't apologize, and she didn't even try to make up a cheap lie to protect my feelings or save face. Instead, she stood up calmly, smoothed down the wrinkles of her expensive silk dress, looked me dead in the eye with a chilling coldness, and told me she was completely tired of living a mediocre, middle-class lie with a man who had zero financial future. She openly admitted that Julian gave her the world, the penthouse keys, the private jets, and the status she had always craved since she was a little girl, things I could never provide on my miserable paycheck. Right there, in front of my eyes, she began packing her luxury designer handbag, gathering her keys and coat without a single ounce of remorse or hesitation. I looked at Julian, hoping to see some shred of human decency, but he just smirked, took a slow sip from his crystal glass, and told me I should probably leave before he called building security to have me forcefully removed for trespassing. Jessica didn't look back at me even once as she grabbed Julian's hand, smiled up at him with pure adoration, and told him they should finish their night at his personal estate in Gold Coast. She walked right past me, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume lingering in the air, a brutal reminder of the woman I used to know who was now completely gone. I watched them walk down the dark hallway together, their shadows disappearing into the elevator, leaving me entirely alone in the empty penthouse office, completely shattered, broke, and broken. The realization hit me like a physical blow that the person I loved had never really existed, or at least she had traded her soul for a corporate title and a black credit card. I stood in the dark for what felt like hours, listening to the rain beat against the glass windows high above the city, knowing my life was completely ruined and I had to start over from absolute zero. I walked over to Julian's desk, looking at the luxury view they enjoyed while destroying my life, realizing that money had won over loyalty. I remembered our humble beginnings in that tiny studio apartment where we shared dreams of building a real family. She used to say that love was all that mattered, but clearly the allure of high society and corporate power stripped away every ounce of her morality. My mind replayed every single lie she told me over the last few months, every false reassurance that Julian was just a professional mentor who cared about her career growth. I felt like the biggest fool in the entire state of Illinois, standing there in my wet clothes while they looked at me like street garbage. The legal system would eventually handle the divorce, but the emotional scars from this absolute betrayal would stay with me for the rest of my days. I looked at the wedding ring on my finger, a simple gold band that cost me 3 months of savings back then, and realized it meant absolutely nothing to her. She didn't even hesitate to discard our memories like trash on the sidewalk. As I drove back home alone through the stormy night, the highway lights blurred through my tears, and the empty passenger seat felt heavier than a mountain. Every corner of our house still had her touch, her favorite books on the shelf, her coffee mug in the sink, making the betrayal sting even worse. I knew I had to be strong to pack her left-behind things in boxes and throw them into the garage, scrubbing her presence out of my life completely. The American dream we chased together was shattered into a million sharp pieces, leaving me to bleed out emotionally while she slept in a mansion. Friends would ask what happened, family would offer empty condolences, but nobody could truly understand the hollow emptiness inside my chest right now. Tomorrow I would have to stand in front of my students and pretend everything was fine, masking the absolute chaos and tearing my soul apart inside. Julian's smirk kept flashing in my mind, a symbol of arrogant wealth that believes it can purchase human souls and discard husbands without consequences. But deep down a small spark of anger replaced the sadness, a realization that I was finally free from a monster who never truly loved me for who I was. I would rebuild my life from the ground up, block by block, without her toxic greed dragging me into the dirt ever again. This was the final chapter of our tragic story, a brutal lesson in how fast wealth can corrupt a human heart and destroy a beautiful home. I locked the front door of my empty house, turned off the lights, sat in the dark, and finally let the tears stop as resolve took over my mind. Every detail of that dark room stayed burned into my memory, from the expensive brand of champagne they were drinking to the soft jazz music humming from the high-tech wall speakers. I realized then that honesty, commitment, and love are just cheap concepts to people who measure human worth entirely by their bank account balances. As the elevator doors shut on them, I stood entirely still, surrounded by the corporate glass and steel towers of downtown Chicago, feeling smaller than a speck of dust. I walked slowly back out to my old car, the engine groaning as I turned the key, a stark contour, as to the quiet luxury of Julian's world. The drive back to the suburbs was a blur of highway lane lines and blinding headlights, each mile taking me further away from the life I thought I had, and closer to an empty reality. When I finally reached our house, the quietness of the neighborhood felt heavy, almost suffocating, like a cemetery for my dead dreams. I walked inside and saw her car keys missing from the hook by the front door, a permanent reminder that she had made her final choice. I sat down on the living room floor, surrounded by our wedding photos on the wall, looking at the smiling faces of two people who no longer existed. I thought about her parents, how they would react when they found out their daughter had abandoned her marriage for a billionaire's lifestyle, but deep down I knew they would probably understand her choice because they always pushed her to marry rich. The ring on my finger felt like a burning brand, so I pulled it off and threw it into the dark corner of the room, listening to it bounce against the baseboard with a faint, pathetic, metallic click. There was no going back from this level of disrespect, no counseling or therapy that could ever fix the image of her looking at me with pure annoyance instead of guilt. I was just a regular guy, a school teacher, trying to make an honest living, but in her eyes, that made me a complete failure. The American culture always tells you that hard work and love are enough to build a happy life, but tonight I learned that wealth can easily buy someone's loyalty and rip a family apart in seconds. I knew the upcoming weeks would be filled with messy divorce lawyers dividing up our modest assets and answering awkward questions from our mutual friends. But I promised myself I would hold my head high through it all. I wouldn't let them see me break completely, and I wouldn't let their arrogant wealth define my value as a human being. The storm outside continued to rage, thunder shaking the windows of my empty house, matching the absolute chaos that was tearing through my heart. But underneath the pain, a cold sense of clarity was starting to settle in. She had made her choice. She had chosen the money, the status, and the boss, leaving me with nothing but my dignity. And that was something neither she nor Julian Vance could ever take away from me. I woke up the next morning to an empty bed, the sunlight spilling across the sheets where she used to sleep, reminding me that a new day had started and the old life was officially gone forever. I walked into the kitchen, made a single cup of black coffee, and stared out the window at the grey sky, realizing that rebuilding my life would be the hardest thing I've ever done, but I was ready to face it alone.